Yo, what is going on, you guys? I have the best Paladin build almost hands down in Last Epoch, period. There are a couple different variations of Paladin build, and recently I posted my leveling build a couple days ago, but this build in the endgame is absolutely ridiculous. It helps me run through highly empowered monoliths, beat most all bosses with ease, run through such high waves in arena that even I'm getting pretty highly ranked on the leaderboards from it. And as you can see, just deal massive amounts of damage. It's not even funny, only at level 90 with not even close to perfect gear. If you're looking for an endgame build for your Paladin, this is definitely the one. With that being said, I'm going to go over everything this build takes to make it work perfectly. And if you spec into this Paladin build, be warned, you just might melt everything you touch. So first I'm going to go over the passives. There are some skills that are the same from the leveling build, but there are a couple of them I switched up, and for very good reason. So for the regular Sentinel Mastery, the passive, you're just going to take Juggernaut for the resistances and the strength, Fearless for the vitality and increased health regen, and Armor Clad for the health and damage mitigation. Now, I also have a build in the description if you want to follow along. It'll make it a lot easier, and I have the skills in exact order of which way you should take them, so hopefully you can follow that while you're leveling up your character. Next, obviously, we specialize as a Paladin Mastery, but we do want to take Void Knight points. Initially, you want to take 5 points here in Abyssal Endurance, so you get the health, the Void Resistance, and Physical Resistance. That really helps to boost up your Physical and Void Resistance, so you don't have to get much of it from other pieces of gear. And it also unlocks your Volatile Reversal skill early, so put 5 points here early to unlock that Volatile Reversal skill, but come back and make sure you max it out 10 out of 10. Very good skill. Forge Guard you also want a little bit later after you put points in your Paladin Mastery. Next, what we're going to do is focus on our Paladin Mastery. So some of the skills, again, are the same from the leveling build. 8 out of 8 for Conviction, giving us the biggest amount of damage buffs in general here overall for fire, lightning, etc. Maxing out a lot of our damage. Valor, 10 out of 10, so we get health and increased healing effectiveness. A big important thing to the build since it works off of healing effectiveness, overall boosting our damage, etc. We want 7 out of 7 for Holy Icon, again, increased healing effectiveness buffs. Necrotic resistance, again, we're spreading across our resistances here to basically get them almost passively, which is what makes the build honestly really good. 10 out of 10 for Prayer, so we get increased damage granted and increased healing granted by 70% if you have healed yourself or an ally recently, and it lasts 4 seconds. So the proc for this is going to be your Javelin, and by taking Holy Trail on your Javelin, this heals you. That ends up proccing this skill, meaning every time you heal yourself, which is every time you cast Javelin, you get 70% bonus damage and healing, and it lasts 4 seconds. So then by the time you cast Javelin again, this is an always up buff. 10 out of 10, gotta have it. Next is Faith Armor, so it increases our armor by 40% and crit strike avoidance by plus 40%. Gotta have for the build again. It ups our crit strike avoidance. This means once our crit strike avoidance is 100, essentially no enemy can crit you. All the crits get downgraded to regular hits. Then we're going to take 12 out of 12 for Reverence of Duality. Increases our overall health, overall damage, healing effectiveness, and increased mana. Literally the 4 stats we need the absolute most. So that's when you definitely want to max out, as well as Light of Rhea. Increases our fire damage by 96%, lightning damage by 96%, and move speed by plus 12%, making us quicker. Again, gotta have those 12 out of 12. As long as you have most of those skills, you're going to be insane already. And then for Forge Guard, we do want a couple points here. Now you really have 2 options here. You can take Weapons Master, giving you strength, which is +1 per point, which is a pretty good boost to the overall damage of the build with increased melee damage and throwing attack damage. So you can go for this if you want. Ideally, because we do so much damage already, I go for the defensive aspect, which is increasing our armor when hit and physical resistance when hit. Meaning once you get this maxed out, you get like 50 or 60% additional increased armor when you get hit. And if you look here, this lasts for 4 seconds. So every time somebody hits you, you get increased armor, which is insane because you can buff yourself by basically 50-60% overall just by getting hit. So I would recommend taking 10 out of 10 here. And other than that, the last 10 points you can kind of put wherever. Ideally, you might want to put them in Blinding Light here in the Paladin Mastery. This is going to give us blind chance and endurance. And then blind is going to half the crit strike chance of the enemy and cause them to aim erratically, especially for ranged enemies. As you level up your Paladin, you're going to find out ranged enemies are really kind of a problem. This build is so good because it takes the leveling build, makes it even stronger, and you don't really have to downgrade your skills whatsoever. And again, that link in the description will have all of these in the order that I select them and level them up. So for Volatile Reversal, this is essentially going to be a skill that's going to amplify our damage by putting out void rifts near the enemy. So how you ideally use this skill is throw a javelin and then cast a void rift on top of an enemy, or vice versa in the other order, and it will amplify the damage of that greatly. Sometimes I've seen it up to 4 or 5 times. We want 2 out of 3 here to reduce our cooldown. The quicker cooldown we go with Volatile Reversal is the best. Cooldown recovery speed here. These are our 3 skills for cooldown recovery that you got to have so you can cast this thing a lot quicker. And then some of the other skills here like Terminal Void Rift, which is where you actually cast the Void Rift when you use it. Void Rift where it deals a larger area of damage, so it's a lot easier to hit on enemies. Higher damage taken by the enemy. Make sure you have both Incipient Void Rift and Terminal Void Rift. Creates a Void Rift where you will actually arrive or go back to. And Incipient does a Void Rift at the start of the cast, which means you can walk up to an enemy, cast it, and that Void Rift will appear there. So you want to make sure you have both of those. Disintegration, which ups our Void Rift damage overall. And Time Rift, so that enemies hit by Void Rifts take increased damage over time for 4 seconds. This is one of the big ones. 3 out of 3, you got to have it early because it ups our fire damage and other damage over time effects, which the build relies on by 60%. So Javelin is essentially same as the leveling build. Additional damage and attack speed here for 4 out of 5. The ignite chance right here, plus 100% damage over time. That is a big one. Your holy trail, obviously, that you need because that's the whole build. So 1 out of 1 there. 1 out of 1 for Path of Judgment, so that you get additional spell damage based on your healing effectiveness, which is what we try and max out in this build. Pilgrimage, so that way you get fire damage, lightning damage, melee ignite chance. Make sure you max that out to max out the damage you're doing. 1 out of 5 here, so that way we up our bleed and slow chance. 1 out of 5 here for max bonus hit damage. 1 out of 5 here so that we can get to taking strategic patience, upping our damage by plus 50%. Holy aura, so again you want most of the same skills. 5 out of 5 so that we up our elemental resistance and endurance. The elemental resistance is a big one here, so that we get our resistances almost passively, so we don't have to waste gear spots on it. Mighty shield you take at the very end just because we can take it. 2 out of 4 here for increasing our health regen. 1 out of 1 for purification, upping our poison resistance, and cleansing ailments. Cleansing ailments is a big one because it takes, again, your ailments that you have, the negative effects, and by casting Holy Aura, you can cleanse yourself of them. So if you're getting poisoned or whatever, it can take for a lot of damage. This can cleanse it by casting Holy Aura. 4 out of 4 for redemption, increasing our overall healing. 1 out of 3 here to up our ignite chance by a little bit to get to burning blows, so that we increase our global fire damage overall by 40%. Again, another huge damage buff. Then we want Sigils of Hope. This casts the 4 sigils around us, upping our damage and healing by quite a lot, but you always want to have this buff up. I saw people worrying about the buff management here to having to cast it a lot over and over and over again. You do have to keep these buffs up, but with the skills I'll show you here, you can almost keep them up without having to ever cast it. And when you do have to cast it to keep the buff up, they last like 30 seconds long, so it's not that bad at all. So you take 5 out of 5 here for extra damage per active sigil, giving us plus 25 overall % damage. Last Wish, which is a big one because it gives you a chance to summon a sigil on a kill. So when you're running monoliths at 6%, every time you kill an enemy, you have a 6% chance of summoning a sigil in place of another one, allowing you to have to not cast it as much to keep the buff up. So make sure you take that. 2 out of 5 for increased healing per active sigil. 5 out of 5 for Sigils of Hope, cost less mana. That's a big one, especially early on for mana management. 2 out of 5 here for Endurance Threshold, so that way we can get to Enduring Hope. This makes sigils last longer, plus 8 seconds. Honestly, if you want, once you level up, take 1 point out of here and throw it in here, so you get plus 10 seconds. It makes it last even longer. And then Telegram, so you up your maximum sigils by 1, so you can have 4 active at one time. And then finally, Shield Rush. So some people are using a different skill here, such as maybe Judgment or any other particular skill, but I still like Shield Rush even late in the game, and I'm going to tell you why. It's mainly because of the mobility of the skill. It makes farming gear and running monoliths way easier because this movement skill can send you all the way across the map with 1 click. And also when fighting bosses of the monoliths and other harder enemies, it just makes it much easier because you have the movement skill, because some bosses have you dodge mechanics where you have to be able to move, otherwise you get one shot. So Shield Rush, I really like it for this. But what we're going to do is take 4 out of 6 for Rush Mastery, so our Shield Rush costs less mana. This is a must-have, especially early on. Protective Speed, so we take less damage while rushing. 4 out of 5 for your Shield Rush, doing more damage. 1 out of 1 for Dark Rush. This is going to make it so you no longer require a shield. Early on, you got to take this as soon as possible because we want to ideally run a staff or a javelin with this build. 4 out of 4 for Warrior's Entrance, making our final hit area and damage much higher. Splintering Impact, so our final hit damage goes up plus 80%. Again, that's that extra burst. Then 1 out of 1 for Echoes of the Charge, so your final hit strikes twice. I'm going to go over gear really quickly. Now for your helmet, you're going to want increased health, increased armor, strength, mana, and vitality. Those are going to be your big ones. It's going to boost your overall tankiness. It'll boost your health and your armor through the roof. You want around the same things for your chest plate. You see I got increased armor and increased health both on them, making me much more tanky. I'm almost invincible at this point, and this isn't even close really to perfect gear. I get the increased physical damage, increased fire damage, and ignite duration, overall helping the build because a lot of it is based off those stats. But again, you can take things like strength or vitality. For your belt, you obviously want the more potions, the better. You can also take increased mana regeneration, increased health again, increased armor, and even damage over time or fire damage if you can get it. Those are going to be some of your main stats to look for on your belt. Your ring, you want things like increased fire damage, increased mana regeneration is always good. Damage over time or elemental damage over time is the other main thing to look out for here. If you can stack both those or a lot of those effects on your rings, you're going to be like extra powerful because my rings are so far the things that has been hardest to find. But additionally, if you can find increased cooldown recovery speed, this is going to bring your skills up much faster from cooldown, overall upping the amount of damage output we can do. So any of those 5 are really good to look out for, and that's going to be essentially the same things to look out for again on your amulet. For your relic, you want a high tier exalted relic with increased healing effectiveness as your high tier affix. You can see that's what I have here. You want to make sure you're upgrading your healing effectiveness on every single chance that you get, because a lot of the build scales off of our overall healing effectiveness. You can see right now my healing effectiveness is 587. That's going to increase the amount healed by your healing skills, and our damage scales off of it based on some of the skills that we've chosen. So you want to get that as high as possible. The best way to do that is get a high relic piece. I'm using a unique set of boots that has overall buffs to my resistances and really good movement speed, just so I can move a lot quicker. If you find exalted boots with great affixes like the other pieces of gear that I've already spoken about that have similar affixes, you're going to make your character even better. And my gloves, again, same thing. I'm using a unique set because I get the increased fire damage, the vitality, and the bleed chance conversion. You can run a normal set of gloves and stack on a lot of these other affixes that we put on the rest of the armor, and you're going to be even better than good to go. And finally, your weapon, and I'm going to admit here, after the rolls I took, this weapon, in my opinion, is extremely good. And that's because I have almost max level affixes on every single piece of this staff. So you're going to want to run a staff for the high spell damage. And again, you want to take one that has the highest spell damage possible. But you can see the 5 affixes here are some very good ones. We have increased damage over time, increased elemental damage over time, chance to ignite on hit, increased fire damage, as well as a 90% chance to blind on hit. Those 4 stats primarily besides blind, you absolutely want. If you can manage to get a 5th one by sealing an affix, something like percent chance to blind is a great add-on for this build. And keep in mind, if you do get something like plus 90% to blind, you can just put 2 points in blinding light. That'll give you a 100% chance to blind. So every time you hit an enemy, you're going to blind them. And then they're going to be throwing stuff at you like an old lady trying to find her glasses. Love you, Grandma. No offense, Grandma. As far as the idols are going to be a lot similar to the leveling build. They're going to be the Cleric's Adorned idols. The second affix isn't quite as important, but you definitely want to make sure you're using 4 of these Cleric's Adorned idols because they give us a huge bump to our increased healing effectiveness, which is one of the main things that makes this build powerful and work as well as it does. The second affix isn't as important, but you can get things that you find that are beneficial, such as things like block effectiveness, etc. Or again, just follow the best ones you can find on the build planner. And in the smaller slots, you want Eterin idols. So you want healing effectiveness on these as well to bump these up as much as humanly possible, and other things like additional resistances on those as well. And finally, the blessings that make this build run from behind the scenes and that make your bees extremely powerful. And most of all of these are empowered monolith blessings, but keep in mind you can also see where I got them right here. This is going to be the actual monolith they're gotten from. So for the first one, you want the Grand Strength of Mind for increased experience. You can take something else here, but I like that until you get to a level 100. Next is Vision of the Aura. I like this for the amulet drop rate. So you can get an OP amulet or whatever you're currently kind of looking for. This one can change. The Black Sun, I want the Grand Wrath of Rhea. This makes 2.2% of our throwing damage leech to health, again adding another component to healing in this build. Or you can select armor here if you get that blessing as well. Next, Chill of Death, so that way we get 39% increased two-handed staff drop rate. You want this so you can get as many two-handed staffs as possible. Obviously, our main weapon, you want to make sure you have a very good one. You want Grand Light of the Moon. That gives us a plus 78% mana buff. This makes it so we almost never run out of mana, which is extremely nice. Hope of the Beginning for 12% increased prefix shard drop rate. This is a good one because our prefix shards, again, are very important to our build. Next, we want Grand Survival of Might. plus 58% critical strike avoidance. Again, I can't stress how important this is. This combined with the 40% you get from our skills section, that will give you 100% crit strike avoidance, meaning no one can hit a critical strike on you ever. Knowledge of skill, this increases our skill shard drop rate by 15%. Grand Bulwark of the Tundra, 44% increased armor, huge buff to our survivability, gotta have it. And Grand Body of Obsidian, plus 281 armor, which once we scale that with our other bonuses, ends up being like 800 to 900 or 1,000 or so. Now, as you can see here, just testing out the build, you can do lots and lots of damage. You can do in the hundreds of thousands of damage easily, even at only level 90, again, with not max gear. I wouldn't be surprised if you can get this to the millions with the full right setup. Now again, the ideal rotation here is going to be to use our Sigils of Hope so we can buff up 4 of those things. We can run in and start gathering up a bunch of enemies. All you have to do then is cast your Holy Aura. It's going to buff us by a huge percentage in terms of damage and our resistance to stay alive. So once you've buffed up from the Sigils and gotten a bunch of enemies together, you're going to cast Holy Aura, turn around, throw the Javelin at them, and watch them all melt. And if you see enemies that aren't quite hitting the fire, all you have to do is run kind of the opposite way, and they'll run into the fire themselves just because they're following you essentially in a straight line, and they'll take themselves out pretty easily. And again, our Javelin comes up pretty quick, so we can cast it pretty repetitively. So all you have to do is try your best to keep those buffs up if they happen to go down. And for stronger enemies or big groups of enemies, we can throw a Javelin and then cast Volatile or Reversal, or cast it and then throw the Javelin. And that's going to send the damage that they're taking through the roof, and you're going to one-shot everyone basically when you do that. And that's why this build is so good against large groups of enemies, as well as very high single target damage. And then we're just going to use our Shield Rush as a supplemental damage ability and a quick rush to move throughout the map. Make sure you're not making these 5 mistakes in Last Epoch because it costs you a ton of time. And check out the leveling build if you haven't already, and the full build is in the description below. If this video helped you out, like the video, subscribe if you're new. Thank you guys. Peace.